Okay, great. Let me know if you can see my screen. Okay, great. So I'll start by introduction. My name is Gilbert Nyandeji. I'm the CEO of Africa Cyber Defense Forum, joining you guys from London and the UK. And today's session is quite an interesting one. And the speaker that just came in before me, who introduced us, just talked about digital economy. And today, everywhere you go in Africa, we talk about digital economy, digital transformation. I mean, if you look at the words that the past speakers talked about, I think he talked about digital economy or digital transformation at least twice in his speech. Now, with this as well, every single African country today, or every country in the world today, if you go, if you're in Kigali, for example, you will hear about digital economy. You're in Nairobi, for example, you will hear Ministry of ICT and Digital Transformation. So basically, what happens is that we have come to an age, of course, we're an information age, but now we're even talking about Web 3.0, so basically the world has moved so fast in the past 20 years alone. The progress that we have seen, what the internet has done and what it's done to the economies of today, it's amazing. People are able to transfer money. I mean, you go to Kenya, for example, you can transfer money through mobile, just your mobile, and you're able to receive a text. And interestingly, you can be able to send at least even $3,000 from just your mobile phone. That's digital transformation. And that's what we call, when we talk about digital economy, that's what we mean. But with this also comes the risk, because in as much as economies, someone is texting, just a minute. Okay, are you guys able to hear me? Somebody saying they can't hear. Is it, yeah, you can hear me. So I think it's, those who can't hear me, I think maybe it might be an internet from your end. Moderator, is everyone able to hear me? Okay, thank you.
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Thank you so much. Yes, so I was just developing on the angle of digital economy, how this has become a huge part of our lives. I was giving an example, like for example, in Kenya, which is a case study, M-Pesa has become a phenomenon, where the daily transaction in M-Pesa is just, billions and millions, of shillings that are being sent in a month. That is something that, digital, when it comes to talk about financial inclusion, we have seen what the so-called mobile money has done in Africa. You look at, for example, now there's a new wave that is coming in of fintechs. I mean, every single part of the continent, if you go, you get young people, young developers working on fintech. Everybody's working on what's the next wave. We're talking even now about mobile money 3.0. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that the world has changed, and technology and the internet has also transformed how we live our lives today. Today is interesting. If you go to, for example, a coffee shop, the first thing people ask for is their internet access. And it just tells you how our lives have become more intertwined with regards to how we live our lives today. We are banking, we are doing our banking services, by just a click of a button, by sitting in our bedroom, in our sitting room. We can be able to transfer money from, let's say, Cote d'Ivoire all the way to Nairobi. We can transfer money from London to USA to, to all these transactions happen just because of the digital transformation that we've had. And Africa hasn't been left behind. However, with this, as I was developing, comes this threat of cyber. Now, a good number of organizations, rather, have realized and have now noticing that there's a lot of risks that are coming with, digitization. You've had cases where banks and financial institutions have been hit. So what happens is that these organizations, yes, we have advanced to the level of digital economy, digital transformation, but we did not see, or rather, we did not preempt the risks that come with it. And I'll show you some of these risks. Then with this as well, now the data privacy has come in. If you're in South Africa, you must well aware of POPIA Act. If you are in Kenya, you must be aware of Kenya Data Protection Act. If you are in Rwanda now, you must be aware of the Rwanda Data Protection and Privacy Law. And we are seeing more and more of these data privacy laws popping up across Africa. But all of them, a good number of them, are modeled, in line with the EU, GDPR. Now, that's the challenge we face now, for example, in Africa, is that every single country, if you go to Kenya, you have to ensure that you comply with the data protection law. However, interesting part is that the US doesn't have a single data protection law. It's interesting. But of course, you have maybe California Privacy Act. But it will be interesting when it comes to an issue of, maybe we'll discuss in the discussion part, issue of when it comes to data transfers. How do we handle data transfers? If you look at the EU and the US, there's a privacy shield data transfer in between the countries. But also now we're also having the issue of big techs. I mean, we have quite a number of big tech companies like Google and the big players in, let's say, the cloud infrastructures. They're actually running and empowering most of our infrastructures in Africa as well. And the question also that will also be coming in is the issue of privacy, data privacy of our citizens. Now, let me go to next. Now, this is how important our lives have become. We transact daily, we call friends and our loved ones via the internet. That tells you the power of digital economy. And if you look at the COVID pandemic, I think it was a clear sign, or rather what exactly the internet has done to our lives. When everybody was just able to do their work almost for 2 years, people were working remotely, they were using the internet to connect to their loved ones. I mean, it became part and parcel of our life. The internet, basically, we lived over the internet. And, you had several terms came in, like, work from anywhere, the Zoom fatigue. All of this became part of our lives. And I'm sure as well, you might have also heard of threats like Zoom bombing, where, people were, finding, for example, maybe people ending up joining Zoom meetings, which they are not supposed to join. Maybe, some people were ending up, invading others' privacy, and, which was not supposed to be the case. So what happens is that with this internet, with more people and more, citizens, and people are spending time on the internet in the digital age, the threat actors are taking advantage of this as well. A good example as well, we have kids. I mean, our kids, if you look today, 15-year-old children have access to mobile phones. But the question comes in, have the parents even themselves look at, for example, the risks that some of these kids might be, exposed to the internet and digital economy? So that comes, of course, with the threats that we are seeing today. So just apart from the enterprise side, which is important to us as well, because it runs our economy, but there's also the impact on our social lives. On our lives, on lives of our children, for example, having access to the internet. And then there's a massive place. It's a wide place full of everything. What we see, the clear web is just, 4%, the 96%, the dark web and all this is something else. It's just another place. Once you are in, it's something else. It's a place full of, drugs, cartels, and everything on the dark web. Now, it's just to tell you that the power of the internet is very, very important, is very, very massive, but it also has these risks and threats that we have to be aware of. And of course, the good thing that at least Africa is, driving this conversation. As Africa, I think we must look into this as a big threat if we do not put in the measures. You must have heard, for example, what happened, for example, in California, in the US, when the critical national infrastructure of the pipeline was hit. And the entire infrastructure, basically, you wake up in the morning, look at national critical infrastructures, maybe your banking sector, all these are infrastructures that our people depend on to live their daily lives. Now, these have become targets by cyber criminals. And this is where we are going. And I'll show you a typical case, for example, what happened in South Africa. I'm sure most of you might be aware, if you're from South Africa, you might be aware of the ransomware attack on the city of Johannesburg. And when people were not able to access power, for quite a number of times, because hackers had compromised the servers of the city infrastructure. Now, this more and more, I mean, maybe, for example, let's meet Australia, for example. I'm sure a good number of you must be aware of what's happening in Australia at the moment. There's been over lots of attacks happening in Australia now. We started off with one of their key banking institutions, and it's now spiraling in more and more. And these attackers are getting more and more and more. And you've also had cases, for example, of central banks. There are central banks. Even last week, I think there's one African central bank that was hit by a ransomware attack. So what happens is that these financial institutions, the institutions we depend on, find themselves in a situation where they're not able to, maybe even provide the main services they're supposed to provide. But yeah, they're digitized, and this sometimes happens. Maybe it's just a small vulnerability. Maybe the server was not well configured. Maybe it is in the angle of, the software, that was deployed in the infrastructure had vulnerability that the organization was not able to identify on time. The other angle is also supply chain attacks. I'm sure most of you are aware of supply chain attacks, where maybe you have a managed service provider who is not putting in place the right security measures. And since they have access to your infrastructure, you're also exposed. And this becomes more and more the case we are seeing, that we have an interconnected world of the internet, but the risks are getting more and more. Now, look at this. This was the federal chairman of the Reserve Bank. He was asked, of all the risks that he sees in the financial sector, which one is of much worry to him? And you'll be shocked that Jerome Powell made it very clear. And he said, but the world changes. This was an interview when he was being interviewed. He said, but the world changes, the world evolves, and the risk change as well. And I will say that the risk that keep our eyes on the most is now the cyber risk. That's really where the risk, I would say, is now, rather than something that looked like global financial crisis. Now look at that. Now the Federal Reserve Bank chairman has recognized that the only major risk that we have, I mean, look, you can talk about this is the Federal Reserve Bank. There are many other risks you look into, financial risks that we talk about, but the only worry for him, the Reserve Bank chairman, is cyber risk. And it's true, only one single attack can shut down an entire infrastructure. And I'll show you a typical case, maybe some of you are aware of the Bangladeshi haste, for example, in 2016, where it was almost $1 billion was almost lost by the Central Bank of Bangladesh. Now, this tells you how cyber risk has become the most important risk in our world today, and you can see from this. Now, the ransomware attack is the worst place you want to be. I mean, look at that picture. You wake up in the morning, you can imagine, for example, let's say you're a student, you've worked on your thesis the entire, 3 years, or, you're about to receive your PhD, and you can't access your file. If any of you who has maybe done research here, you will know what that means, because where do you start? If you're not able to access the work you've done maybe for the past 3 years, your research, or your research paper is locked and you're being told you can't access your files till you pay someone, what can that mean to you? Now, extrapolate that a little bit into an organization where you're a bank, financial institution, you wake up in the morning, you're maybe the CIO, the CISO, and you get such a message, access denied. You can't access your Active Directory, you can't access your files, you can't access any system in your organization. What do you tell your board of directors? What do you tell your CEO, or even the CEO? What do you tell your board? That we can't be able to offer the banking services because we have been hit by a ransomware attack. So ladies and gentlemen, this is how it can be of an impact. And this is the worst place to be. It's headache. And look at the impact on reputation for the organization. What of the damage when it comes to recovery for such an organization? It takes time. And there's a recent study that was done is that hackers can actually spend more than 365 days in your network without detection. So that's why organizations need to have also clear, capabilities to be able to detect, some of this and clear monitoring of the technologies and networks. So this is a very, very bad situation to be in, to be hit by a ransomware. And look at this. This was the Italian railway system, and this happened in March. Why I took this is March. This is March 23rd of March. So basically, how many months from today? It was it's just the beginning of the year. So this was the Italian company called Ferrovie dello Stato Italiano, FS, temporarily halted some ticket sale just because they were hit by a ransomware attack. Now, the state-controlled FS said it has suspended sale of tickets as its offices and self-service machines in the train stations a precautionary measure. And look at that. That in the sense that you go to a train station, you can't buy a ticket, basically. And it happened as well, I think, in a company as well, where the system they were using to manage the train system wasn't working, was compromised by attackers. So what happens is that this is the system that the train drivers were using to know when to maybe be at the next stop or the following stop to pick passengers. And they were compromised by ransomware attack. And you can imagine that level of disruption it caused, for example, and this is a critical infrastructure. How many people go to work on this, on this station? In Europe, this is part and parcel of daily life to be able to take a train to maybe your next stop in the evening. So can you imagine that you go to a station and you find that, you can't even buy your ticket, you can't even move? What do? It becomes a big, big challenge, it becomes a big, big mess. And that shows you where we are going, as we talk about, cyber threat and the internet age. Now, I think this must have made the headlines. If this was also in March, this is interesting again. This was 17th of March, right? When this story came out, but this was 23rd. So just 5 days difference, basically. This one was TransUnion in South Africa. They were hit and the hackers were demanding, I believe it was around $3 million, if I'm not wrong with the figures. But yeah, look at that, $3 million. What next? What do you do if you don't have tested backup? What's the way forward? I mean, there are organizations that have shut down just because of a ransomware attack. So basically, think about that. Look at the Bangladeshi one. This is the one I was talking about. The Bangladeshi official's computer was hacked to carry out 81 million pays. And this was just by error, by the way. The transfer was to be $1 billion. But it's just that the hackers made a mistake. In the Swift, when they were typing in, they made a mistake and only $81 million was lost. But actually, the entire money was almost $1 billion. And this was in Bangladesh. And this was one of the largest bank heists to date. And this happened through Swift, and they were able to transfer this money. And, after that, the Fed and they tried to recover the money. But yeah, there's a lot of money that was lost. And can you imagine? I mean, $81 million being lost just by a click, of a laptop, just by a click. How can that impact be? And what for an economy? And this can shut down the entire African economy. Imagine one central bank hacked and $1 billion is transferred. What happens? What will I mean, it will be very hard to explain, because if your central bank, 1 billion has been transferred just by someone maybe sitting somewhere in remote area, that tells you the power of, and the level of threats that we are seeing in the digital age. Now comes in the data privacy. Already you've seen the threats, right? But as you also do your business in the digital age, you have also to respect people's privacy, because privacy, if you see, privacy is a fundamental right. I mean, I remember there was one interview that Mark Zuckerberg was asked when he was giving a session at when he was being asked about privacy at Facebook, and he was asked one question: Mr. Zuckerberg, will you be happy if someone knew the hotel you slept in last night? And yeah, he was shocked, because he doesn't want, that is his privacy, right? But unfortunately, Facebook collects that data. That was the contradictory statement. Is that as much as you talk about privacy, and if you guys have noticed, most people don't even read privacy. They always have a privacy policy. Some of these social media tools are a good number. I'm sure maybe some of you have the digital, the social media accounts. Some of you don't even read the privacy laws or the privacy policy of some of these organizations. Of course, it's made so long. I mean, how many people read it anyway? And you will be shocked by the level of data some of these people pick. They pick your friends, you know, some of them are even recording, call conversations. They're recording a lot of things. But most of the people don't know this because they don't know. They don't value their privacy. And the worst part is that people don't know what their privacy means. I mean, most of you have your digital, or rather so-called your digital footprint. It's, I mean, I can even tell, just go to someone's Instagram, you will know, okay, they ate lunch at 12, they traveled, and there are cases where I think there have been attacks where people have actually been targeted just by what they post online. So your privacy also matters. There's some things you need not to share with everyone. So these also, as you spend your time on the internet, the privacy comes in. And that's why you see a lot of countries as well have now passed a lot of these privacy laws that are protected. And the EU, if you're doing business with the EU, you need to be conversant with the EU GDPR, where you need to be able to ensure that you are protecting the privacy and the data of European citizens. So basically, privacy becomes a very, very important part. But the question comes in, why do we need privacy laws? Now, privacy laws is very, very important because we have lost the borders with the digitization of the internet. Now we are talking about globalization. There's private data flows from country to country for many different reasons. So at least we need to ensure that at least we have that clear framework, even of sharing some of this information, right? We're talking about data aggregation and retrieval technologies. For example, you know, data mining has become, you know, we have very, very powerful technologies. Now we're even talking about cloud computing, right? Which is coming along. And we're also seeing convergent technologies advancements where we're seeing gathering, mining, and distribution of sensitive information, you know, things like your credit card information, you know, a lot of information. And also there's the fundamental right. Privacy is a fundamental right as well. So that's why we need to ensure at least we protect people's privacy, you know. And this basically brings me to the conclusion, brings me to the halt of what my topic today is on the issue of our topic, as I was talking today, is on the issue of digital economy, cyber threats, data privacy, and the regulations. And we're going to see more and more of these regulations come up as more African countries struggle with this, because the problem we have in Africa, you have 50 plus countries in Africa, and every single country, you know, so we're actually, you know, the EU took time, but at least the EU harmonized that. But how do you harmonize the Africa data protection laws where each and every country has its own? How do you understand what Kenya wants you to do, what maybe Ivory Coast wants you to do? And if you're doing business in all this, then you need to be able to have a team that really can be able to ensure compliance in all these markets. And that will become a challenge. With us, ladies and gentlemen, I stop there. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to take. Thank you.
Nos remerciements, Monsieur Gilbert, pour votre présentation très instructive sur l'économie digitale, les cyberattaques, et merci pour ces nombreux exemples exposés. Donc, nous avons appris beaucoup de choses. Je tiens à rappeler nos membres que vous pouvez poser vos questions. Bien sûr, ces questions doivent être en lien à la présentation de Monsieur Gilbert. Donc, vous pouvez soit utiliser le chat pour écrire vos questions ou utiliser l'icône réaction. Choisissez la main levée pour prendre la parole. OK. Donc, j'ai une question de monsieur. OK. I will switch to English to. So the question from Mr. Auguste Fabien: why authorities are not able to trace and catch the cyber ransomers while they direct money into bank accounts? Mr. Gilbert?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I was muted, so I couldn't respond. Yeah, so the question is, let me just go to the question. So why are authorities not able to trace and catch cyber ransomers while they direct money into the bank accounts? Well, this is not a very easy thing because cybercrime is a cross-border problem. The issue of attribution comes a problem, but also you need jurisdictions, cooperation, and that becomes very, very complex. I mean, how do you hold account maybe country X, which is maybe not willing maybe to cooperate? Then it becomes a challenge. And that has been the challenge when it comes to issue of holding, some of these criminals to account, has been the issue of, cross-border cooperation. And also don't forget, there are some also that are state-sponsored attacks as well. So it becomes quite complex. And this has really, really become a big challenge. But a lot of work has been done, for example, by Interpol and quite a number of authorities to be able to hold some of these criminals to account. But it needs a lot of collaboration, interstate collaboration, to be able to ensure that some of these cases are handled, because it's not just very easy. And attribution is also another challenge, for example. Yeah. I hope that responds to the question. Yes, yeah. I think there's another question. If the ransomware gets paid in cryptocurrency, it can be hard to trace. Okay, I think that's just a comment. I think there's no other question, Megali.
Yes. So
Okay.
we don't have any other
I think there's
question.
another question that came in. In your opinion, what actions could be undertaken to sensitize African authorities to implement data protection laws and follow them? Now, that question, if you look at, for example, the African Union, there was the African Union, African Union Data Privacy Convention that was passed in 2014. But the ratification for African Union, it had to have, I think, 15 members, I believe, for it to be tying to all African countries. But I believe only a few members have ratified it. I think 13 or something, last time I checked. So basically, this is the challenge as well, is that you need to have the authority and the political will as well from the African states to be able to understand why it's very, very important when it comes to issue of data protection and when it comes to also enforcing them, because also some of this, you have to set up the entities, you have to also ensure they have the budgets, because setting up a unit on so-called data protection commission without a budget is actually just useless. So basically, the state voluntary state participation is very, very important to ensure that there's a political will. But unfortunately, maybe if a government comes into place and maybe that's not a priority to them, then becomes a challenge. But basically, to me, is the government's role when it comes to regulation. So they have to really ensure that this, and of course, everybody now talking about digital economy. So you cannot talk about digital economy without talking data privacy and data protection. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have another question from Mr. Moussa Stepanonlu. The question is in French, so I will switch to the French channel. Thank you. Nous assistons aujourd'hui à plusieurs gouvernements qui essaient de faire passer des lois pour leur permettre d'écouter les systèmes dans un souci d'investigation. Qu'en penses-tu? Quels sont les avantages et les inconvénients? Merci. Gilbert, quelques secondes, nous allons activer votre micro. Merci.
Allô? Oui, Megali, je ne sais pas si j'ai bien compris la question, mais vous pouvez quand même le traduire en anglais, s'il vous plaît, pour que je puisse bien comprendre. Brice, ou quelqu'un pour m'aider là?
Oui, excusez-moi. On était en train d'activer le micro. So the question from Stephen is that actually we have several governments who are trying to impose some laws to allow them to listen to the system and also for investigation.
Ok, ok, donc j'ai bien compris. Je voulais juste savoir si j'ai bien compris la question. So basically, this is a tough part, because when government puts in a law, when it comes, there's always a thin line. Government is the only institution, unfortunately, that has the monopoly of crime. The government is the only institution that commits crime and get away with it, unfortunately so. Now, there are cases where governments have used, national security interest to have surveillance technologies to listen to, maybe it might be opponents or dissidents that might agree with them. And I think that has always been an issue of more or less digital rights, or rather maybe rights to the citizens. But it's a very thin line when, where you can't, because the government will always justify that it's an issue of national security. Now, the problem is who puts the government in check? And I think that comes to the country as well, having stronger institutions, right? I'll give an example like Kenya, for example. I think Kenya case, why I'm giving Kenya case, because I remember in the Kenyan case, the Communication Authority wanted to pass a law when it comes to, an equipment in terms of surveillance. And I think the court stopped it because people went to court and they felt that this was a way for government to listen to people's conversation and surveillance. And I think it was blocked. So basically, I think that shows the angle, for example, countries like that, for example, Kenya case, the institutions were strong enough to be able to, hold the government to account. So the question comes in, how do we have those institutions, stronger institutions in cases like that, where the government can also be held accountable? Because with accountability, and the government also has to be held accountable, the same way we hold our governments accountable when it comes to budgeting, also when it comes to issue of digital privacy, I think that's also something that the institutions we have must be strong enough to be able to hold governments account when they're they're going beyond their mandate. But again, it's a very, very tough spot to be in. You must have the clear place, the right rules of the land, because remember, government, as I said, will always be able to justify its actions. And unfortunately, government is the only institution with monopoly of violence. So it's a very tough place to be, but yeah, having stronger institutions can help. Okay, this is the last question. What percentage of an organization's budget can be injected in cybersecurity in the meantime? Well, that's a tough question. But basically, the organization needs not to operate on what we call cybersecurity poverty line, basically. I mean, you need to ensure that at least you are protecting your systems, you know who's accessing your systems, you are monitoring, you are able to, but above that, you need to have in place the right policies and procedures. So the problem I always have with that is that the organization that spends so much money into technology, but they have forgotten the people, the processes, because cybersecurity is three things: people, process, technology. So you have to have the people, right? Have the right people, right, with the right skills. Then also the people also have to be aware, even your receptionist at the desk might be the only single point of entry to an organization. If they just click on any phishing link, that's it. As a hacker, I will have access to the entire organization just by that social engineering link that was clicked by your receptionist that you might have ignored and not given aware, or rather done awareness to the receptionist as far as social engineering or cybersecurity threats are concerned, or cyber risks are concerned. So the issue of awareness is very, very important, even to the employees in the organization. So 3 angles: processes, technology, and the people. Technology should just come in to enhance, but basically I would advise organizations to spend more time on the processes and the people. Technology is just the last part to enhance. So basically that can define your organizational budget. I will not put a figure to it to say, you can spend 20%, 30% is recommended. No, it doesn't also make business sense, because security should enable the business. So it should also be an hindrance. I mean, if you, for example, put a regulation where you tell organization you need to spend 50% of your organizational budget on cybersecurity, then I think it doesn't make sense, because at that point, shareholders are looking at the bottom line as well. So basically, there needs to be a clear balance between the controls, the benefit, and of course the impact. And that's where risk impact comes in place. So risk assessment of your organization will define the budget you put in place to be able to respond to cyber, to have a clear budget for your cybersecurity. There's a question: any ideas, suggestions to share with African members, ISPs, banks, and universities, which we might jointly or individually adapt in order to enforce safety of users across our region? Yeah, so basically, just to tie in what I've said, the issue of awareness is very, very important. But the issue of having clear processes in place is very, very important. There are a lot of tools actually today that are available that you don't even, cybersecurity doesn't have to cost you an arm and a leg. There are quite a lot of good technology that exists there that smaller organizations, smaller universities can use. For example, they are available free, available tested frameworks that organizations can use. They don't have to break the bank to go and, for example, look at, monitoring technology. There are quite a number of good SIEM solutions that can be used, that you don't have to, as long as you have a good technical team, they can be able to deploy and assist you, to monitor your assets, do your inventory and all that. So basically what I can say is that, since like university, because when you talk about cybersecurity, the budgeting always comes in. But the budget should be an excuse. There are a lot of things they can do. I don't think you need a budget to write a policy. You don't need a budget to write an information security policy. Hell no, you can write an information security policy without going to look for a budget from the board or for the management. So basically, you can write those, have a clear policy, do awareness, for example. Why do you need a bigger budget to do awareness? You can easily do it with the organization, within the little framework and other, the resources you have. Yeah, that's all for me. Unless there's any other question, I thank you all.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Gilbert, d'avoir apporté vos réponses aux questions. Merci beaucoup. Donc, nous avons un survey pour évaluer la présentation que nous venons de suivre. Je demanderai aux membres de prendre quelques minutes. Le lien sera partagé dans quelques instants dans le chat. Nous avons, excusez-moi, Monsieur Gilbert, nous avons une autre question. Dans le chat, is there a global platform we could redirect organizations? Je reprends. Is there a global platform we could redirect organizations to monitor cyber threat on the continent?
Okay, thanks. I was muted. Yeah, so basically that question on having, with regards to a global platform, we could direct organizations to monitor cyber threats on the continent. Unfortunately, there isn't. For the continent, is there a global platform we could direct organizations to monitor cyber threats? No, unfortunately, that's an area where Africa is lagging, having that threat platform to be able to monitor threats is something lacking. And I think that's an area maybe AfriLink, Caltech, leadership, and other organizations to be able to assist, because there isn't at the moment. Okay, someone has responded that is handled by each country's cybercrime unit. But yeah, yes, it might be handled, as Alan has said, but I think what the gentleman is asking is about Africa-wide. I think, that's something that is not there. Every single country is doing their small monitoring through the SARCs and all that. Yeah. I hope that responds to the question, unless